Number of things are going on. The one that is the most disconcerting is the Uber hawk, Victoria Nuland. You know, if you want to know the direction that Joe Biden wants to take when it comes to Russia and China and all things warmongering and neoconish, you need only look between the eyes of the evil Victoria Nuland. What do you think we learned from Victoria Nuland's promotion, Scott Ritter?
Well, I think what we learned is perseverance pays off. She's been, just like my camera, there we go. It's hard for me to speak to a computer that I can't see myself. I get a little disconcerting because I'm, so I had to fix that. But look, perseverance pays off. She's been a longtime player in the game. You know, in the State Department, she's served under the Bush administration, Republican and Democratic administrations. The consistency is her consistent embrace of. I've often articulated that there's no difference between neoconservatism and neoliberalism; that they're one and the same. And so she has been a consistently a consistent advocate of neoconservative / neoliberal policies, especially in terms of how the United States uses its strengths to impose its will on situations as they emerge. She's been a Russia hawk from the very beginning. You know, a lot of people don't realize that she came into prominence by following the coattails of Strobe Talbot, who was a journalist who the Clinton administration brought in to manage the post-Soviet relationship between the United States and the Commonwealth of Independent States. And Victoria Nuland was there. And what's important about that is when you take a look at what Talbot was doing, it wasn't diplomacy, it was exploitation. He was basically empowering the United States to exploit a Russia that was struggling to emerge from the ashes of the former Soviet Union. And that was Victoria Nuland's job, to go in there, exploit, to keep down, to suppress Russia. And she's been doing that ever since. I think most people, if you weren't a policy wonk, you didn't know Victoria Nuland's name until Maidan in 2014, when she famously or infamously showed up with cookies, handing them out during the Maidan revolution, riot, uprising, whatever name you want to put on it. She's also known for her infamous phone call with the American ambassador to Ukraine, where she had some less than diplomatic things to say about the European Union, and she also infamously bragged about hand-picking the future government of Ukraine. Yats is our boy, and she, in doing so, aligning herself with right-wing Ukrainian nationalist politics, which are deeply embedded with the ideology of Stepan Bandera. She herself may have some roots to Ukrainian American activities that are linked with Bandera. So, this is who we got now as the number 2 person in the State Department, a very influential position. She will have a very strong say on policy. Things will go through her to get to Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State. So, she is a filter. Anybody hoping that good ideas might percolate up through the State Department and appear on Blinken's desk, and Blinken will take action, I think we can pretty much guarantee that no good idea will survive Victoria Nuland. And anybody who was hoping that the United States might be able to take a more responsible stance when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine and potential venues for a negotiated settlement are likewise going to be disappointed. This is somebody who actively advocated for the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline, bragged about it when it happened. She's somebody who's been advocating for continued military support and expanding military support. So once again, we have a situation where we put the absolutely worst possible candidate in the one position this candidate should never be in. And that's what we get with Victoria Nuland. She's going to lead us the path of confrontation.
I also think it tells us about more about Biden. For those who think that Biden could have some level of constraint, for those who think that Biden could have some level of practicality, if you are seeing Victoria Nuland as someone who should be moving up the chain, that just shows that you're a pure ideologue. That Biden is that when we see Blinken and Nuland and Sullivan, and we see these pure ideologues, and we kind of, recoil in horror, that Biden is clearly one of them, and he's clearly, I'm not going to say guiding this ship, but I would say that he is on board with the current direction, which is, right over a waterfall. Scott.
Yeah, I think it also speaks to, it's funny how in 2008, in 2016, and in 2020, especially 2008, 2016, America said, we're not going to elect Hillary Clinton to be president. We don't want to have anything to do with her as the president. Hillary Clinton's more of a president today than Joe Biden is, especially when it comes to national security. Victoria Nuland is her person. Jake Sullivan is her person. Tony Blinken is her person.
Kamala Harris is her person.
Kamala Harris is her. So Hillary Clinton is. People keep asking, who's in charge? Who's in charge? In many ways, Hillary Clinton's in charge. These are her people. I can guarantee you, there's continued lines of communication between her and them, either directly or through cutouts. And Joe Biden's at the point right now where I always hesitate to say what I'm about to say because I don't want to be accused of ageism. I'm very good friends with Seymour Hersh, who's older than Joe Biden and whose brain is far more effective than mine. And whose body, he's out there playing tennis and golf like a madman. So I don't like to say if you're of a certain age, therefore you can't do X. But sometimes age catches up to people quicker than others. And Joe Biden, he's been lapped by age. He's no longer combat effective. His brain doesn't work. He's tired. He's muddled. He has to read from note cards. And these note cards are prepared by other people. These note cards do not reflect Joe Biden sitting down and saying, what wonderful thoughts do I have today? I'm going to handwrite them. Calls out his secretary, type these up so I can have them with me as the day goes by. Because on occasion I get tired and I need something to refresh my memory. You know what? I'm 62. That's how I'd operate if I were there. I'd write up little things just to remind. It's called a to-do list. Everybody has them. I have it. It's a reminder, a daily reminder of there's things that need to be done. And if you don't write it down, sometimes you can get caught up. That's okay. That's not Joe Biden. Joe Biden's thoughts are being dictated to him by others. And the people writing these thoughts are, by and large, loyalists to Hillary Clinton. And so she is, we didn't elect her, but she's there. She's running the show right now. And I think that's one thing that people have to reflect on, that this isn't so much a reflection of what Joe Biden is thinking, because I honestly believe that Joe Biden isn't thinking much anymore. This is about what the people controlling Joe Biden are thinking. And one of the people that's definitely in the background playing puppeteer is Hillary Clinton.
I agree with you. And I tend to think that a person who has a lot more power, a lot more effect on Biden's policies than is admitted is Sullivan, because I've heard people who are close to that, people whose name I will not mention, say Sullivan's the guy. Everybody's got to go through Sullivan. He filters everything out and filters everything back down. And sometimes when he filters something that Biden said back down, he just changes it because Biden ain't gonna remember anyway. But hey, say X, then Joe Biden just says Y. But Joe Biden ain't gonna remember if he said X or Y, so he's kind of running, part of the old shadow government, which makes sense. That being said, that takes us to the next point, which is something that you're well aware of: the situation in the Black Sea. The discussion of NATO, of trying to, and this is how I would sum it up, trying to challenge what Barack Obama acknowledged, and that was Russia's power and supremacy in the Black Sea, their ability, with the missiles that they have, with the technology that they have, with the Crimean base, their ability to project power into the Black Sea, which is their front yard, not their backyard. The U.S. is going to project power in the Gulf of Mexico. Certainly, they project power in the Black Sea. But with the Newlands et al. In power, it seems to me that they're up to no good in the Black Sea. And it was ostensibly about the grain deal, but it seems like they're, with bringing in Finland in and all, and now they're talking about another route. Your thoughts about this, the controversies going on in the Black Sea and the level of danger there?
Well, first of all, the Black Sea has always been a tinderbox waiting to be ignited. Even in the Cold War, I think 1986, so ostensibly the time when we're talking with the Russians and all that, there was an incident off of Crimea where a Russian destroyer rammed a U.S. cruiser because it got too close to the side. And we were playing up until the very end. We're playing stupid games that we always play in terms of rushing the Crimea Peninsula just to generate a Soviet, later on a Russian response, etc. But the reality is there's no place in the Black Sea for a NATO fleet to hide. Russia has the control of the Black Sea coastline to the depth of the Black Sea. If there was a naval engagement, every NATO ship in the Black Sea would be sunk. That's an absolute certainty. And some nations recognize this, like Turkey. It said, we ain't going to be escorting any grain deals. We're not going down that path. And so, Russian control of the Black Sea is a reality that people have to adapt to. It's one thing to test Russia during a so-called Cold War. It's another thing to test Russia during a hot war. And anybody who talks about flexing muscle right now, you're basically just saying you want to create a condition that inevitably leads to the defeat of the United States in the Black Sea and potential for nuclear conflict because of that defeat. The grain deal was always a mechanism that did everything but support the hungry and the underdeveloped portions of the world. It was a deal designed to enrich Ukraine. They made a lot of money off of this. It was a deal designed to keep food prices low in Europe. That's number one destination for this grain was Europe. And even if people need to understand that, like in the United Kingdom, none of that grain went to the United Kingdom. So they're like, well, how does that affect UK food prices? Well, because the United Kingdom buys food on the market and commodity prices shot up. And that's the reality. When this grain deal is working, commodity prices are stable, they're low. When this grain deal isn't working, commodity prices rise. And when commodity prices rise, that means that fish and chips cost more for the British consumer, even though Britain doesn't directly. But the other people impacted, and this is where it gets into the developing world. The vast majority of the food, it's misleading for people to say that because the food didn't go to the underdeveloped world, therefore there was no benefit to the underdeveloped world. No, that's a misleading statement, because most of the world food programs don't deal with receiving food donations and providing those food donations to those in need. They deal with them getting a budget allotment. They get money, and they use that money to buy food or food products that are prepared and bring it in. So when commodity prices go up, the price of food goes up, but these budgets remain the same, which means that if I'm planning on feeding the starving people of Africa and I have $10 million, suddenly if the prices go up, my $10 million is buying far less than what it used to buy, which means I have far less product for those people in need. And this is where there is a detrimental impact on the world population. But again, it's not Russia's fault. This was this grain deal was a deal, and there are a couple things about it. One, Russia was supposed to be able to ship grain without any, um, obstacles. Russia was supposed to be able to ship fertilizer without. Fertilizer is an important element, even more important in many ways than the actual food at this juncture, because the food that's being shipped now isn't going to be going to the needy. It has to be processed and all that. There's already food out there in warehouses waiting to be bought. Um, so, the high prices will impact that. But what happens if you don't have the crops in, and if the land hasn't been fertilized properly, your crop output is going to diminish drastically. And that's the problem. Russia's been saying we need to get this fertilizer out there. But they put roadblock after roadblock in the way of Russian fertilizer. There was an ammonia pipeline, ammonia being one of the raw products, raw ingredients for, I guess it's nitrogen-based fertilizers. They blew it. The Ukrainians blew up the pipeline. Russia, even if they did everything, they can't do it because they've been cut off a banking system. So, Russia can't be involved in any transactions related to any of the activities that they were allowed to do. They weren't allowed to do them, but if they were allowed to do them, they still couldn't, do them because of the banking. So Russia's been doing nothing. And Russia said, we're not doing this anymore. We're not allowing the situation. But what really pushed Russia over the edge was the fact that the Ukrainians were using this grain deal to do two things. One, to create a safe zone in the greater Odessa region where they knew the Russians wouldn't be attacking out of fear of disrupting the grain thing. And so they have warehouses full of equipment, military equipment, things supporting the front. So it became this logistics hub for not only supporting the front lines, but carrying out attacks against Crimea. Vast majority of the drone attacks against Crimea come from the Odessa area, from drones that are operating from airfields within the so-called protected space. The same thing with the attack that took place on the both attacks, in fact, on the Kerch Bridge. The first attack, the suicide truck bomb. I think the Russians are convinced that those explosives were shipped out of Odessa as part of the under the cover of the grain deal. And the underwater drone attack that took place, the Russians believe that the Ukrainians deployed from one of the ships that was transiting the so-called green corridor, the protected corridors. And so Russia is saying no more. We're not going to allow this to happen. So they're shutting her down. They not just withdrew from the grain deal, but they're ensuring that Ukrainian ports can't participate in any effort to ship grain outside of the framework, or even if the grain deal comes back, Russia's degrading the Ukrainian capabilities. This is punishment for Ukraine because of what they've done. Russia will find other ways to get its grain to the market. Those nations in need will have access to Russian grain, but Russia's just not going to play the corrupt UN game anymore.
Let me ask you about this. Sergei Shoigu is in North Korea. Interesting things going on in the Pacific here the last week. I'm sure you're familiar with it. Russia and China were once again doing Navy drills near the Sea of Japan. Now Sergei Shoigu is in North Korea. There certainly seems to be, and again, what happened? Prior to that, the United States has sent some nuclear sub to dock in North Korea. The North Koreans were unhappy about it. Sergei Shoigu shows up. It certainly seems to me that North Korea, let's face it, the last time there was a war on the Korean Peninsula, China joined in. It seems to me that North Korea, China, and Russia are making it clear that there's some sort of an alliance. I'm not going to call it a military alliance, but there's some sort of alliance that potentially could turn into a military alliance. Your thoughts about Shoigu in? There have been rumors about things coming from North Korea to Russia. Your thoughts about where North Korea fits into this puzzle?
Well, first of all, North Korea borders Russia. A lot of people maybe lose sight of that, but there is it's a limited border, but there's a border nonetheless that goes into the Russian Far East. As you pointed out, the United States is upping its game, so to speak, when it comes to its nuclear posture vis-a-vis the defense of South Korea and Japan. This is largely in response to North Korea's continued development of nuclear missiles that are capable of carrying nuclear weapons, which North Korea has produced. Some people say 180, some people say 200. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's more than one. And the United States has made some talk about using nuclear weapons against North Korea, et cetera. I think what the Russians and the Chinese are doing is creating a framework of collective self-defense that involves North Korea as a mechanism of deterring any precipitous American action. That is, by saying that we stand with North Korea, that an attack on North Korea, they haven't said this yet, but I think this is the direction they're moving in. An attack against North Korea is an attack against us all. We see that's the Russian approach towards Belarus by creating a union. I'm not saying there's going to be a union with North Korea. In fact, there isn't going to be a union with North Korea, but there could be some sort of understanding. I think, the Russian-Chinese relationship benefits from not being treaty-based because, as they've pointed out, a treaty is limiting. It's limiting by its own language because the treaty only encompasses what is in the four corners of the agreement. A wide open friendship encompasses whatever you want it to encompass. It can be as big as you want, it can be as little as you want. There's no, there's no carved in stone definition. And I think that you could be seeing the development of something like that with North Korea. A general understanding that an attack against North Korea would be considered an attack against Russia or China, but not set forth in a detailed treaty, so to speak, because that would, a treaty locks Russia into a situation, and I don't think Russia nor China want to get locked into a situation, but I do think that it's in their interest to create a mechanism that hopefully convinces the United States that there's no such thing as a limited war in Korea, that if you go to war against North Korea, it could become a regional conflict immediately. And maybe that'll serve as a chilling effect on U.S. policy.
I also think this, Scott, when the U.S. talks about the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, that let's be honest about it, North Korea ain't giving up their nukes. They saw what happened to some other countries. They'll never give them up. However, if they were to, as I see it, the only way that could happen would be if Russia and China would guarantee their security. If we said we're going to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula, however, Russia and or China are going to guarantee the security. And if someone attacks Russia, they could put them under their nuclear umbrella, under their military umbrella. To me, that would be the only path for denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, because as we saw recently, the U.S. made some overtures to North Korea. We want to talk. And they said, wait, listen to you guys, you're gangsters. They literally said the U.S. is gangsters. Now, if you look at the JCPOA and you look at the Minsk Accord and on and on and on, let's face it, it's not practical to trust the Biden people, Newland, et cetera. So your thoughts about the denuclearization of the peninsula and the part, if that would happen, that China/Russia would have to play in that?
Look, Donald Trump, when he was president, was very much a mixed bag. As you pointed out, he withdrew from the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. Precipitous act, irrational. It's been a disaster. He withdrew from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, one of the most dangerous actions a president has taken in modern times, because it opens the door for the conditions that exist in the 1980s that the treaty was designed to get rid of, the introduction of intermediate nuclear range nuclear tipped missiles back into Europe. That leads to every sort of possibility that could result in a nuclear conflict. So extraordinarily dangerous activities on his part. On the other hand, he's the only president that said, "Look, I'm willing to sit down with Kim Jong Un and have a dialogue about what needs to be done to get this denuclearization on board." Now, remember, I mean, we today we all talk about, we go, well, he met him in Singapore, he met him in Hanoi, he went across the DMZ. I mean, yeah. Well, you forget though, Fire and Fury. Remember the Fire and Fury speech at the United Nations? This was all, set in motion by him standing up in front of the international community, threatening to rain death and destruction and brimstone down on North Korea. Not exactly what we would call kind of cool-headed, diplomatic approach to resolving issues, but it did get him at the table with Kim Jong-un. And if you read between the lines, so to speak, about the Hanoi meeting, Kim Jong-un was ready to sign something substantive. He was going to put the put his nuclear program on the table, not all at once, but he was saying, we're going to start here, and then you're going to do this, then we're going to do this, then you're going to do this, and here's a path that leads us to all of our nuclear weapons being gone. Now, I can't imagine today, if you're the Japanese or the South Koreans, that you're going, well, it's a good thing we destroyed that that the United States, that Pompeo and Bolton stabbed Trump in the back and sabotaged it. This is a good thing. We sleep better at night knowing that there's a potential for imminent nuclear destruction. In retro, see, this is the stupidity of anybody who pursues conflict over peace, because there could have been peace. There could have been a peace treaty, a peace agreement with North Korea. There could have been mechanisms in place that that would see the verifiable disarmament of North Korea's nuclear program. This all was possible, and the world would have been a better place without it. Think of the lessened tensions, but the United States doesn't want to lessen tensions. This is what people need to understand. The establishment can't have peace with China. Can't. Now, Donald Trump was the anti-establishment president, but look at the people he surrounded himself with. Mike Pompeo, the quintessential establishment guy, from the Republican establishment. John Bolton, sort of Mr. Establishment. And we can just go down the road. On North Korea, Trump was betrayed by Bolton. He was betrayed by Pompeo. They literally stabbed him in the back because their marching orders were this can't happen. There can't be peace breaking out in the Korean Peninsula. It's against everything that we have geared ourselves to do. Because remember, we have a policy of confronting China for the purpose of containing them and eventually rolling them back. That's the policy of the United States. And it's hard to speak about confronting China when peace is breaking out all over. When every time you see the Chinese, they want to hug you and hold hands and sing Kumbaya, or the Chinese version thereof. What we need is tension. We need to be antagonistic, and that's why the North Korean nuclear deal that Trump was negotiating collapsed. Because the North Koreans were ready to pick it up. They understood the political train wreck that is the Trump presidency and post-Trump. I mean, they to believe that North Koreans weren't aware of how difficult it is to deal with Donald Trump, you'd have to believe that they're ignorant as the day is long. They kept the door open for Biden to come in. They kept the door open for the establishment to come in. They said, we are really serious about this. We would like to do this. But Biden hasn't even tried to pick up the baton and run with it. Instead, he doubles down on stupid, deploying the nuclear submarines, giving North Korea or South Korea and Japan nuclear protection guarantees, incorporating This is the ultimate one. I just don't get it. Incorporating Japanese generals into nuclear planning sessions with the South Koreans. Again, I mean, if I'm a Japanese person, I'm going Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Hiroshima, Nagasaki. Never again, never again, never again. Isn't going to happen. We're not going to do it. No. But instead, you have the Japanese going, "Hey, can we play? We'd like to get into that nuclear sandbox. We'd like to be able to do, some of the things that everybody's doing. We want to feel big and strong and responsible." It's lunacy. But the Biden administration could have come in and picked up that baton and brought closure to this issue. Now, the problem, though, that confronted both Trump and Biden was that what do you do if you're trying to convince a negotiating partner that this deal is permanent, this deal is real, this deal is around, in an environment where George W. Bush withdrew from the foundational ABM treaty in 2002 with no good explanation, where the United States withdrew, as I mentioned, from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. We withdrew from Open Skies. We are actively cheating on New START. You know, who's ever going to trust the United States as a negotiating partner? How do you enter in an agreement? Even with Joe Biden, if Joe Biden can't take something to the United States Senate, then it's no longer. Obama proved that. Obama said, I can't take this to the Senate, but trust me, this will work out. Trust me. And so the Iranians went, all right. They signed a line. Unfortunately for Iran, they didn't trust them. They actually predicted this. They said, no, what's going to happen is there's going to be a future president that's going to withdraw from this. The U.S. will never be able to live up to this, but that's okay. We're agreeing to it, and we're going to hold the U.S. accountable for, what President Obama signed up for. But the fact of the matter is the North Koreans know that even if they cut a deal with Biden, if the Senate doesn't ratify it, then it'll be overturned by whoever comes after him. Why do you want to even negotiate? And even if the Senate ratifies it, the ABM treaty, the INF treaty, the Open Skies treaty, all three of those were ratified. New START, all ratified by the United States Senate. It's not because the rule of law is meaningless to America in a global context. We don't believe in the rule of law. We believe in might is right. We believe in the exceptional America. That if we say it's so, therefore it is so. There's no moderating influence out there. Arbitration. It's our way, literally, or the highway. And you can't trust the United States. This is a big problem. It's not just with North Korea, Garland. This is with Russia. This is with China. With all the people that we're talking about, the potential of, a diplomatic solution. The ideal diplomatic solution is a treaty that formally and legally binds the parties to the commitments made within that treaty. I can't say I'd hate to be. It actually would be pretty interesting to be a future arms control negotiator trying to hammer out a treaty with either the Russians or the Chinese and to see what demands that they put on us. Because I can't imagine Russia and China saying, well, we're just going to play by the same rules we always played, but because they've been stabbed in the back too many times. All those Barack Obama fans out there, they do know that when Dmitry Medvedev when they began discussions in 2009 for the New START treaty, Medvedev said, we have to have a ballistic missile component to this treaty. We have to. It's in our national security interests. We've got our nuclear arsenals down so low that we're now in the point where even one or two installations is a game changer because you can threaten to shoot down our missiles. Then we lose all the deterrent value and open ourselves up for attack. So we need an ABM thing. And Obama said, can't do it right now because I wouldn't be able to get New START passed through the Senate. But I promise you, and that's the problem with the American politicians, when their lips move, they're lying. I promise you we'll treat this issue seriously as soon as I get this New START treaty done. And the Russians said, okay. Anatoly Antonov, he was the lead negotiator. He's now the U.S. the ambassador to the U.S. in Washington, D.C. He said that's one of his greatest mistakes was believing them, because Antonov then went on to become the lead negotiator for what was supposed to be the new anti-ballistic missile treaty. And yet when he knocked on the door, no one was answering. The Obama administration was closed for business, didn't want to deal. They lied. They were disingenuous. They left the Russians out in the cold. So I think the day of Russia saying, yeah, we'll sign this treaty now, and then we'll see what will happen in the future are over. I think Russia's going to be in the business that if they're going to do a treaty, there are going to be some rock hard commitments that it's not going to be easy to withdraw from this treaty. That there will be consequences for withdrawal from the treaty in terms of international law, et cetera. They're going to need that to have confidence to enter an agreement with the United States, because otherwise you're just fooling yourself. And if you're a good faith implementer like Russia is in the case of New START, where you're actually destroying the things you're supposed to destroy, and you look over at the United States and you realize all they're doing is taking things, putting it in a mothball and keeping things ready to redeploy, that there was a problem with that negotiation. The United States did not negotiate in good faith. It did not. It wasn't a sound negotiating partner. And people need to understand that, and this is where Victoria Nuland comes in, because she's going to be a critical player in advising, shaping, facilitating, implementing any treaty relationship the United States may enter into, especially those that involve Russia directly or indirectly. So, America has blown it. We used to be trusted. I can guarantee you that when I was a weapons inspector in the Soviet Union, when we put out our hand and we shook our hand, that was our bond. It was going to happen the way we said it was going to happen. And we made every effort to implement the treaty in strict accordance with our obligations under the language of the treaty. I can't say that same mindset exists today. I think that we are in the business of believing we are the sole remaining superpower on the planet, and that everybody is beholden to us, and that treaties are an impediment. They're an inconvenience that we don't need to enter into, because why bind ourselves to something with an inferior? Why not just dictate an outcome to them? And America's got to wake up and understand that the global reality that made that approach possible, that is, a variety of weak nations around the world continue to be totally dependent upon the United States, no longer exists. That there are other powers out there, Russia, China, India, who are either the equal or in some cases superior to the United States in specific capabilities. And we no longer get to dictate an outcome. We have to start working with our neighbors to find a way to peacefully coexist, or else we're just going to destroy the planet.
Let's talk about the battlefield, the current situation. We've seen all this discussion of the so-called counteroffensive, the offensive, which was kind of farcical if you look at it. Attacking dug-in positions is never a good move, and when you don't have air power and you're running out of ammo, it's just a kamikaze attack. But we've seen some attacks. Some people have some counterattacks by Russia. What are your thoughts of the situation on the battlefield at this time along the contact line?
The counteroffensive, which I think there's widespread agreement that it began on June 8th. That's when the initial attack was launched against the Zaporizhia direction. It's real. It's a real counterattack. There's significant fighting taking place. And the Ukrainians are showing a level of tactical, operational, and some would even say strategic acumen that might take some people by surprise. It's a very capable force that's fighting the Russians right now. Very capable, very lethal if given the opportunity. But it's also a force that's being weakened on a daily basis. This counteroffensive, by some accounts, has cost them 1/2 of the troops that were trained for this task. 60,000 troops were trained. There's good reason to believe that 30,000 Ukrainian troops have died since June 8th, trying to execute this this plan. That's a serious loss of manpower. It's very difficult for militaries to absorb this level of casualties and keep on ticking. And what's not said there is what happened to the equipment. Where is the equipment? And we don't know where the what happened to all this equipment that was given to the Ukrainians. The Russians continue to have superiority on the battlefield. They're doing well. There are some points of difficulty. If you remember, we've had discussion about the Bakhmut battle, and what again, for all the Prigozhin fans out there, you need to understand what happened. The battle for Bakhmut was never supposed to happen. Bakhmut, from a Russian perspective, they didn't need it. When they took Soledar, they could have frozen that conflict right there and began the process of digging in, building their defenses. In anticipation, remember, for the counteroffensive that Ukraine has been saying we're going to be doing. But instead, Prigozhin, because he needed to continue the operational viability of Wagner past the 1 May termination of the contract that he had with the Ministry of Defense, a contract that the Ministry of Defense wasn't going to re-up because Wagner was now fighting on Russian soil. Wagner, when created, was fighting on Lugansk soil, Donetsk soil, independent nations, Ukraine. They could exist. But now Russian law doesn't permit a private military company to exist, or at least it didn't at the time. I think there's new laws being passed that might allow that. So Prigozhin needed to keep the fight going to show the viability of Wagner, to make it appear that Russia couldn't win the war without Wagner forces. So he became decisively engaged in the Bakhmut battle. And the rest of the Russians are like, we don't want to do this battle. This is not what we want. But he pushed ahead on his own. And he got in a situation where his forces aggressively moved in, and then he complained about the flanks, and the paratroopers and Marines had to come in and secure the flanks. But in doing so, they got caught up in this battle, which, yes, meat ground up the Ukrainians, but it also was grinding them up too, and they didn't have a chance to consolidate their positions, to dig in, to lay the minefields that have been so effective in breaking up Ukrainian counterattacks. And so now in the Bakhmut area, the Ukrainians are putting in a lot of resources, and the Russians aren't operating from that solid foundation of an in-depth defense, that's been prepared for months in advance. And so we have a much more fluid situation, greater difficulty, and it lends itself to, again, information warfare is everything. The Ukrainians, saying that we're back in Bakhmut, we're getting ready to cut off Bakhmut. Now the Russians are forced to fight and die for obscure villages and obscure hills, just because if you lose Bakhmut, that'll be a huge psychological blow. So now it's almost like the Ukrainians have flipped the script with the Russians. It's the Russians that have to continue this fight because of the optics of losing Bakhmut. Fortunately for the Russians, they're not suffering anywhere near the level of casualties that the Ukrainians are, but nonetheless, it is disruptive to the Russian war effort, what's going on in Bakhmut. The Ukrainians have the initiative, they have the momentum, but they still they really haven't taken that much territory. They're losing a lot of guys doing it. But Russia, on the other hand, going north, Russia's broken through Ukrainian defenses. I think yesterday they penetrated 6 kilometers, which is significant. The Ukrainians are having to divert forces away from Bakhmut and from Zaporizhia up to this area to help seal off the Russian offensive. So there's just a lot of stuff happening right now. You and I talked, we've had this conversation in the past about what's next. Okay, we talked about the potential of collapse for the Ukrainian army. We said, what happens when you suffer a certain amount of casualties, leadership, logistics, and there comes this culminating point where you stop being combat effective, and almost in a blink of an eye, you become combat ineffective, and then there's the collapse. The Ukrainians may be heading to that point in certain areas on the line. But now the question is, what next? You and I have talked about Russian reinforcements, that the Russians have upwards of 180 to 200,000 guys out there that haven't been committed to the fight, at least decisively so. But the real question is, what can they do? What can you do with 180,000 guys? Can you take Kharkov? Kharkov's a big city. Can you, with 180,000 guys, take Kharkov, knowing that in World War II, you would have to have 2-3 million people to take Kharkov? Can you take Kharkov? Can you hold Kharkov? So if the Ukrainians decided to turn Kharkov into a fortress, does Russia have enough troops to take that city, to get into the house-to-house fighting? We keep talking about Odessa and how it's, people imply that it's a ripe fruit ready to be picked from the tree. No. To get to Odessa in World War II, the Soviets had to take Kiev first and then pivot south and fight their way down on the right bank of the Dnieper River to get to Odessa. Does Russia have enough troops to do that? And so I think Russia's getting to the point right now where, even though they're in a good position vis-a-vis the Ukrainians, you don't see the Russians out there thumping heads and putting people into. They have reserves. They have significant reserves, and these reserves are going to have an impact on the battlefield. But the question is, what impact? If I buy a balloon that can be blown up this big, but I only have this much lung capacity, I can only blow so much air into that balloon. The Russians, Ukraine's this big, but the Russian troop structure right now, the forces available, they have limited ability to progress significantly beyond some limited objectives. I believe that if the Ukrainians abandoned Kharkov, that Russia could move past and secure the Kharkov Oblast. But if the Ukrainians, turn Kharkov into a fortress, Russia would have some problems, manpower problems. The same thing with going to Odessa. If the Ukrainians abandon Odessa, Russia might be able to, move, pivot, head down south towards Odessa or towards Kherson, which they'll have to secure before they can move on to Odessa. But now, again, it's just math. You remember the right bank of Kherson when the Russians abandoned it? How many troops did they bring out? 30,000. 30,000 troops were brought out, which implies that you're going to need at least 30,000 to go back to reoccupy it. All right, let's say 180,000 minus 30,000 down to 150,000. That's just to get to the right bank of Kherson. Now, let's say we're gonna punch in and threaten Kharkov. Let's say that we can achieve the surrounding of Kharkov with 80 to 100,000 troops. Okay, now we're to 110. 130,000 troops. Suddenly we don't have that many troops left over. And you want to keep a certain amount. You don't want to put all your reserves in. You want to keep a certain amount. So right off the bat, regaining the territory of Novaya Russa, of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk is about the maximum level of what the available Russian troops can do without having more troops available. So there's talk now of Russia needing to mobilize. Now, this is if Ukraine retains the will to fight. Because we talked about collapse. Collapse is a different thing. But even if they collapse, there's only limited things you can do with the troops available. Russia doesn't have unlimited number of troops available to it right now. They're in a good position right now. They're in a position to defeat the Ukrainian military. There's no doubt about that. But anybody, I keep hearing, we're going to drive to the Polish border. With what? With what? We're going to do this. We're going to do that. With what? It's a challenge. I think they can either take Kharkov or they can take Odessa, but I don't think they can do both with the troop structures that they currently have. And so now the question is, what's next on the agenda? Which brings up something that I read that's interesting. apparently there's negotiations taking place involving Ukrainian oligarchs who, and the reason why I don't believe this is pure speculation is because they were involved previously. If you remember the deal that got the Azov guys out of Mariupol to Turkey, Abramovich was involved in that. And apparently Abramovich is involved in a current level of negotiations that includes Poland and some of the Baltic states about bringing an end to this conflict. And I think the reason why I am looking at this and emphasizing this is Putin's always been looking for a negotiated end to this conflict. And the conditions that Putin has put down do not include taking Odessa and taking Kharkov. They include simply securing the territory that is Novorossiya. Russia's unyielding on that. And when you look at the framework that's allegedly being discussed in this new negotiation, it's that Ukraine will make territorial concessions, that they will concede Novorossiya and Crimea to Russia in perpetuity. They will sign that away. They will agree that they will never be a member of NATO. Then they will look for security guarantees. Russia will be part of it, but other nations will be part of it, including the United States. And it's curious the time frame, because the United States is not a party of this negotiation, but apparently the United States is an interested party that will be invited in December, which implies that might be the end game for the negotiation. And then European Union membership, meaning something that links Ukraine to Europe. All of these are realistic, and these are all what resonates with me. These are all points that Russia had already agreed to, for the most part. If you go back to that document that Putin held up when the African leaders came to St. Petersburg, this is what Russia already agreed to. So this isn't like Russia's going to have to make compromise and all that stuff. I think what we're realistically looking at in terms of this war is that Russia will not bite off more than it can chew. Russia will continue to pressure the Ukrainians hard on the entire line of contact, punishing the Ukrainians and continue that punishment. But anybody who's looking for the destruction of Army Group Center, big red arrows moving forward, I don't think Russia wants that. I think, which means Russia doesn't want Odessa. Russia doesn't want Kharkov. Russia wants what it has. And the other reason why I think that they don't want Odessa and Kharkov is, again, I talked to some people. The situation's changed fundamentally from February 2022 to today in terms of the attitude of the population. First of all, there's been a lot of cleansing. So the pro-Russian elements of the Odessa and Kharkov population probably don't reside there anymore. The really pro, we're waiting for Putin kind of guys. There's some people there who want autonomy, who want to speak the Russian language and practice it. A lot more people identify themselves today as Ukrainian. And Kharkov may not be a friendly city anymore. Odessa may not be a friendly city anymore. And the Russians have to take that into account. If you're going to try and absorb these territories, the costs going forward in terms of potential guerrilla warfare, unrest, etc. I think Kharkov and Odessa are now seen as poison pills that Russia doesn't want to swallow, that Russia wants to consolidate the territories that it has, and they want to create the conditions for a lasting peace. And I think the Ukrainians are starting to wake up to the fact that that's probably their best option, especially after Vilnius. I mean, Vilnius was a slap in the face to Zelensky and to every Ukrainian soldier that's been sacrificing their life on the battlefield. They were fighting hard because they were told there's a pathway to membership. But it's clear that there is no pathway to membership, that Ukraine will never be a member of NATO. And now that Ukraine's faced that ultimate reality, I think it's time that other people came in. And an important part of these negotiations, and it's left very nebulous, is that there's a buyout, apparently, for Azov. because one of the Russian objectives is denazification. And there's some sort of buyout clause in here where there will be monies deposited in foreign bank accounts for senior Azov people who will retire outside of Ukraine. And normally I look at these things and I'm like, that's a speculation, conspiracy theory. But I looked at this one, and every one of them I went, that makes sense, because one of the key questions is, how does this thing politically end? I mean, you and I, we're confident, I continue to be confident Russia's going to win this thing militarily, that they're going to destroy the Ukrainian military. But even if the Ukrainian military dropped their arms and surrendered, Russia doesn't have enough troops to move in and occupy everything, and the population may not want to be occupied. We have to keep that in mind. So it's not in Russia's interest to push for a political settlement that requires Russia to bite off bigger chunks militarily. It's in Russia's interest to continue doing exactly what they're doing right now, which is winning, which is defeating the Ukrainian military, and then find the appropriate vehicle for a political solution. And the other curious thing about this this negotiation is that neither France nor England nor Germany are invited, because Russia's like, well, we can't trust you. We don't want to talk to you. And it's curious, again, we talk about the animosity between Poland and Russia and all that. Who is invited? Poland. Why? Because Poland has a vested interest in a really secure Ukraine, a Ukraine that can function as a nation state. It's in Poland's interest to have the most viable Ukrainian state emerge from this war. So I think that's why Poland is at this table. Anyways, we'll see where that goes. But it's I just thought it's a fascinating, when you look at that, because you have to look at the battlefield right now and say, why is Russia doing this but not this? What is this? What is that? What is this? And there's a lot of restraint on the side of Russia. Even the big breakthrough they had, it appeared that for at least a day, when they broke through the Ukrainian lines, there was nothing. There was nothing. They could have gone. The problem with going is now you have to commit everything into that decisive, and now you've created a bulge. You have to defend that. Yeah, and that brings in all the logistical things, and you complicate the military picture. And the Russians were like, oh, hold up, wait a minute. Hey, Ukraine, you guys want to fill that gap? Yeah, go ahead and bring those 3 brigades in. Thank you very much. Okay, now nobody will be talking about big aero operations. We'll go back to grinding them down. I don't think Russia's in the big aero business right now. I think Russia's in the grind them down business, trying to make the point that they're going to get this territory back no matter what. And the question is, where does Ukraine want to be when that happens? And I think right now, and look who's coming in. It's one of the guys. The names was Kolomoisky, the guy, the underwriter of Zelensky. He's involved. Abramovich, others. This is the money. These are the guys that are going to be the heart of the Ukrainian economy in a post-conflict world. So I think that there's a lot more to this talk of this particular negotiation than maybe many people give it credit for.
I agree with you. And I also have said all along, I believe that Russia sees the military conflict as one element of this conflict, because they're doing other things. They've got this big Africa summit going on, huge part of what they're doing. They're in North Korea. They're doing things with China. So while we all focus on the conflict, I think Russia realizes we've got a multi-pronged strategy here, and the military part is just one of them. We don't need to overrun anybody right now. We need to hold steady. We need to keep the pressure on here. We need to keep the pressure on in the Sea of Japan, where we need to go to North Korea. We need the Africans coming in. It's a multi-pronged strategy, which is a very wise move on their part. I've always said, I don't think the Russians want to push the U.S. or push NATO to a point where they got to make a decision. I think they want to keep the pressure on in all arenas. Scott Ritter, Thank you very much, everyone. Go to Scott Ritter Extra. That's scottritterextra.com. He's done some fine work there. Agent Zelensky is a great video. It's great work. Everybody find that. Share Scott's stuff on your on all of your social media platforms. Make sure you check regularly on Scott's. There's a lot of good stuff on scottritterextra.com, and there are opportunities there for you to contribute. Let's face it, everybody's got to eat. This is hard work, but you know, we gotta keep a roof over our heads and have the ability to continue to do this. People have to travel, people have to make calls, pay for things, buy computer equipment. So go to scottritterextra.com, keep up with Scott's work, and do what you can do to contribute to Scott's valiant efforts. Thanks a lot, Scott, and I will talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks, Colin.
All righty.